Okay, so we're going to go. So real quick, my name's Corey Davis. I'm the design director at Psyonix. Been there for about 10 years now. I started as a programmer and moved into design. And right now my job is kind of overseeing all of our projects from a design standpoint, specifically Rocket League. Obvious question is, what the hell is Psyonix? You can blame Dave sitting up here for naming us that. It's impossible for people to spell. But we're an independent San Diego, California studio known for Unreal Engine outsourcing. So Dave hired us, a bunch of us out of college, and taught us the mysteries of Unreal. And we did a lot of contract work, so things like Nosgoth, which we worked on most recently with Square Enix. And then games you might have heard of, like Mass Effect 3, Gears of War, Bulletstorm, and XCOM. So we've had hands in all of these games, but a lot of people have never heard of us. And so when people ask, are we an overnight success, we try to point to things like this. Like, we've actually been grinding in the industry for a really long time, and all that stuff built up to what Rocket League is. So a quick outline of what I'm going to do. First, we're going to kind of... Okay. Can someone from GDC help me with that?
What do we need help with?
We don't have the slides on screen.
Oh, you know what? That device just down to your left, the video switch, I think it's the other glowing light.
The other glowing light.
Either input 1 or 2. Should be a big 1 or 2. If not, I'll run up there.
I see 1 and 2. I just don't know what to press on them.
Press one of them.
This is really smooth.
All right, I'm coming up.
I'm just going to keep talking while they fix this. So we're going to kind of cover the development history of Rocket League from our humble beginnings in 2008 with the first game that we made, and all the way through Rocket League's release. Then I'm going to talk about some key decisions that we made. So when we looked back at the history of Rocket League, there were a couple key points where we could have gone one way or the other, and I feel like the choices we made were a big part of why it succeeded. Then I'm going to talk about some what I'm calling unintuitive insights. So when you play Rocket League, if you try to dissect it from a design standpoint, yay! Thank you. There's some stuff in there that you might not expect it works the way it works. So we wanted to kind of dive into specific designy implementation type stuff of like, here's a weird thing that we did and why. Fourth, sort of trying to analyze success. I'm going to pretend that I know why we did as well as we did. Just looking at all the different factors we think contributed and decisions we made that fed into those. And last, the things that we may or may not have learned after release. So it's been about 9 months. It's been a pretty crazy ride for us. And I'm just going to try to go through what that's taught us as a studio. So first off, I'm going to show you a video to kind of give you some context of where we started at. So that's not our upcoming N64 port with crossplay. That is Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket-Powered Battle Cars, the worst named game of all time. And I regret it more every time I have to say it. So that came out that was by us. It's not a rip-off game or anything like that. We released that in 2008 on PlayStation Network. Most people have never heard of it, except recently in articles about Rocket League, right? And here's why. It got a 67 on Metacritic. It's basically the same game as Rocket League, and it got a 67 on Metacritic. And interestingly, when I was looking up stuff for this speech, I realized that on the Metacritic Awards, we were the 92nd best PS3 game of 2008. So I know what you're thinking. Of course you would make a sequel to the 92nd best PS3 game of 2008. But it wasn't that intuitive to us. We weren't sure what went wrong. We were a small studio. We didn't really know what we were doing with our first independent game. We had worked on, Gears of War and other contract work, but it was our first game. But what we knew was that people that got it, that actually played it, loved it. Like, it had a very sticky effect. So even though not many people heard of it, the people that did wrote us all sorts of fan mail, made incredible things, and they were still playing through 2015 when we released Rocket League, which, when you think about an indie PSN-only game with no marketing from 2008, is kind of incredible. And as sort of a precursor to the social push we saw with Rocket League, it had endless community montages and YouTube clips. We were one of the first games on PS3 to support native YouTube export. So even back in 2008, we had people pushing crazy YouTube montages about the game. So we felt like there was something there. And ultimately, we felt like it could have gone differently. We love the game, and others do too, but almost nobody heard about it. We had no marketing. We didn't have much time to polish. And critically, we felt like it wasn't the game we had developed on PC. We played every day on LAN on 60 FPS computers, and the game that came out on PS3 ran maybe 30 FPS on listen servers that people hosted. So it just wasn't the same experience. There's a lot of input lag, there was a lot of latency that we didn't run into. So there's a lot of question marks for us on, like, did we blow it? Did we release something that wasn't up to our standard of what we had played? So anyway. Sorry, I thought someone was shouting at me. So move along a couple years. This is 2011. Great name, right? World Battle Car League. I hope you're all awake now after that awesome soundtrack. So that was our gritty reboot, right? Like, that was what everyone was doing at the time. We just called it Battle Cars 2, but it was really an attempt in 2011. You know, we'd seen Monday Night Combat and other games start edging towards what became esports, right? And we thought our game was a natural fit for that, but we didn't have necessarily the money to make it or the publisher to produce it. But it was envisioned as a higher quality, more realistic sequel, and we I say spent here, but really wasted a lot of time concepting, experimenting with scale, because we had this fixation on not being perceived as RC cars. A lot of people thought the first game was RC cars driving around on a field. I can't confirm or deny in Rocket League if they are, because that's still a secret. But we thought it was a big deal because we thought to be this serious esport, it needed to be clear that these were like awesome human-sized vehicles. And we wasted all this time on getting scale right, trying to create stadiums that looked realistic for full-size cars. And it meant that we never hit on a fun play-testable build, which at least at Psyonix is sort of a death sentence. We very much operate on finding something that gets us excited and iterating as a team on it. And the fact that we were changing everything from scale to our physics model to how the cars worked all at the same time, it was just this soup of half-thought-out ideas and changes from the first game. But so that pitch reel was built in 2011. We were working with people like EA Partners at the time, which in retrospect might have been a good thing that we didn't. But at the time, it was really exciting. It was like new publishing models for indie developers. But nobody liked it. Nobody got it. And I don't really blame them, right? Car soccer is inherently weird. I don't know what EA or anyone else's marketing team would have done with a game as weird as this. So yeah, we shelved it due to other studio priorities, not because we didn't want to work on it, but the realities of game development are we needed to take contract work to keep paying the bills. So it went on the back burner. And in some ways, we felt like it was ahead of its time, especially in retrospect, right? Like, esports kind of just started spinning up in 2011. I don't know if we would have done well if we'd come out then, but ahead of its time. So we did what every developer did earlier in this century and started making it open world. So this is sped up so you can see it more quickly, but our lead technical artist, Ben Beckwith, here in the front row, is a wizard with World Machine. So we thought, well, why not make an open world with cars? And then maybe, you know, if you want to drive to a stadium and play soccer, that's just one mode that's available to you. You know, kind of a cool idea. Insanely out of scope for our studio. I think at the time we were like 15 guys. So open world driving. Tried to do mini games and races. It's like, okay, there'll be dynamic objectives everywhere, you know, the Ubisoft of Rocket League. But the scope was out of control. The split focus, and this should be obvious to any of you that have tried to design a game like this, the split focus made it impossible to make any part of the game good. We were trying to serve too many masters at once. And the physics that make soccer fun are kind of terrible for other activities. Like, our physics are very fine-tuned to the arena and to playing soccer with jumping and all that. And when you drop that into a hilly terrain, it kind of sucks. So we really struggled to make those two ends meet. Shelved it, again, pretty typical. So we find ourselves finally at Rocket League. It wasn't called Rocket League at the start. It took us a lot of argument to get to that name. But the core design vision was just, it's the game we wanted the first game to be. And that is the actual acronym, which is maybe the worst acronym of all time, too. But it was a small, dedicated side team, so we were working on some big publisher deals, but we had free cycles. And we wanted a narrower focus than all these other crazy sequel ideas that we've already talked about. And it came down to car soccer on dedicated servers, PC alpha build as soon as we could, and eventually free-to-play. So the context here is, this is mid-2013, TF2 and Dota are kind of killing it. No one has really failed at free-to-play on PC yet, so it's just like, you just turn free-to-play and money shows up at your door in buckets, right? So really quick, what changed? This is what everyone asks us. Like, you made this game that didn't do very well, and then you made the same game a little better. Like, what actually changed? The big one for us is feature addition. So dedicated servers was huge for us. It's what we always wanted for the first game and couldn't do or afford. And with a game as input and latency sensitive as Rocket League, dedicated servers were an absolute must. 60-ish FPS, I say that because we didn't quite ship at 60 on PlayStation 4. But again, response is so critical in a game as twitchy as Rocket League that extra frame rate was absolutely essential. And that's, I think, probably the big difference with the PS3 version of our first game was it ran at such lower frame rate that it just felt bad, felt sluggish compared to what we played on PC. And the third big one was just massively improved matchmaking. I won't go too deep into this, because if you want to hear about this, you should watch Josh Menke's talk on the Vault that he gave yesterday, because we do a lot of things very similar to him, like uncertainty-based skill rating and a flexible preference system. And finally, just car customization. We knew it was going to be a sport, a very pure sport, most likely. And so we knew one of the only ways we could give people agency over their vehicle was hats. And the big one is just polish, right? Like, this gets overlooked a lot. Everyone pays lip service to it. But we spent basically 2 years polishing a game that we released in 2008 and then re-released it. That's hard to understate. And not everybody has that luxury. We bankrolled that by doing contract work. And I can't understate how hard that is, but how beneficial it was that we had that time to make the game as perfect as we could make it. And the last part of this area is outsourcing experience. So like I said, we were primarily an outsourcing studio until this year. And that means we got to meet and learn from a lot of different people, Firaxis, BioWare, et cetera. And we got to take what worked and avoid what doesn't. You know, we were traditionally a very production-loose studio, and we saw the entire spectrum. We saw teams completely bogged down by meetings and stand-ups. Not to say there's anything wrong with Scrum or Agile, but these teams seem completely paralyzed by their production processes. So we took a lot of that to heart. And we felt like we mastered Unreal by assisting these people. By the time we got to Rocket League, we knew every nook and cranny of Unreal, every stupid thing it does that you have to know about that's just black magic. And secondly, our internal development process changed quite a bit. We released a game in 2011 on iOS called Arc Squadron. You probably haven't heard of that one either. It was a Star Fox-inspired rail shooter, but we did polish the hell out of it. It reviewed really well. It just didn't sell very well. And secondly, canceled failed projects. I feel like a lot of people come up and talk about their successes and don't acknowledge all of their failures. We've canceled and failed so many games. Development is just hard. Everyone fails at it, and it's okay to do that as long as you're getting better as you go. But the recurring theme was we had too many cooks. So we started at 10 guys, and we scaled to 20 and now 50. And our design process just didn't scale, right? Like, we were used to looping everybody in on every email, pleasing everyone. And that utterly sabotaged us on a bunch of different games. So I would highly advise finding a way that you can work with a larger team if you do scale beyond a small group. And we frequently got lost iterating without a clear vision. So I think the big lesson of Rocket League is we knew exactly what we were making from day one. We knew what the game was, and we knew what we wanted to do with it. And it was very easy to get from point A to point B in that sense. But a lot of our ideas were so hazy, and we just thought we'd find it iterating, and we just went in circles and ended up scrapping them. All right, so that's the whole history part. I'm going to move on to more interesting stuff, hopefully. So some of the key decision points. The first one, and this is the one we get a lot of recognition for, which makes me very happy, is we kept it really simple. So a natural thing when coming into our game is like, why don't the cars have stats? I want a car that's better at playing goalie than a car that's better at striking. And A, we didn't have them in the first game, and B, we're a little bit sort of opposed to it on principle. Our game is a very fluid game where you can play multiple positions. You can go from goalie to striker in 2 or 3 seconds. And imposing an artificial structure on that limited you to a role based on what car you picked felt really alien and wrong. And we wanted to maintain that purity of how simple and straightforward the game was. So we ultimately decided not to do stats, but not like it was obvious to us. We were really worried about this. We thought, based on the reviews from the first game, people would think it was too simple. There was no depth to it. So we agonized over this, actually. And ultimately, a lot of it came down to just production reality. We didn't have time to test and iterate on stats. So it's not all brilliant. Some of it's just we didn't have time. And second is modes. So you can see on the left a couple of our crazier game modes that have come out since launch. But again, we were really worried that people wouldn't accept a single soccer mode for 20 bucks or whatever we launched at. But again, recurring theme, scheduling concerns trumped those concerns. So we just didn't have time to make a good mode. And it's hard for secondary modes to measure up when we had, at the point of release, we'd been working on the soccer mode for over 7 years, right? So it's like we're going to make a basketball mode in a week, and it's going to somehow stand alongside that. It just didn't seem realistic. So I think what we've done instead worked out really well, which is kind of releasing them piecemeal as events or seasonal modes after release. But again, this was not obvious to us that it would work out. Single layout. So I'm so glad we did this, but it caused a lot of contention. The first game had a lot of crazy layouts. If you play, you may have seen in recent updates, we put in some of them. So there's like a donut that you can drive through the goals. It gets pretty wacky pretty fast. But what we found looking at our stats and talking to our players of the first game is they almost all played a single map called Urban, which is the layout that you see in Rocket League standard maps. So we just didn't see the point of investing development and art resources and making all these crazy layouts if everyone was just going to play on our equivalent of D dust anyway. And it had a bunch of benefits. It allowed us to perfect the design instead of splitting focus again. And it basically means that every angle, corner, and surface encourages fun and has been polished and thought over. This goes back to that polish comment. We spent so long on the individual collision of every corner of this map to create the type of gameplay we wanted, and there's no way we would have hit that quality level if we hadn't done this. But ultimately, it frustrated a lot of our veterans. They missed the variety. I had the first game, and why is there less content in the sequel? And that was just a downside that we had to accept. So aside from what did you change, this is the #1 question we get. How did you have, and I quote, the balls to go premium with this game? We actually started life as free-to-play. It makes a lot of sense for a multiplayer-centric game with an odd premise like cars playing soccer. Obviously, you need a large player base for good skill matching. That was our #1 concern for this game. And Valve makes it look really easy, at the time, at least. This is actually a quick screenshot. We had a whole crafting system in our free-to-play PC alpha, some beautiful programmer art, but so you could acquire these things and craft car parts. It was going to eventually build into a monetizable system, and we threw all this out when we switched. A tremendous amount of code and effort went into this, and it's just gone. So not last summer, 2014, our VP of marketing, Jeremy Dunham, up here came in and convinced us the error of our ways, thankfully, and we felt like it was a better fit for our brand and content. And critically, it freed us up to focus on the game and not free-to-play systems. I think this gets overlooked a lot in the rush to free-to-play, but we felt like developing the game as free-to-play was turning us into monetization designers and not game designers. We weren't really focusing on what was best for the player, but what was best for converting the player and for monetizing the player. So this was very liberating. We could finally refocus on what is the best game Rocket League can be and what is not the best monetization vehicle it can be. And we had some concerns about market saturation. It seems like it's harder and harder to pull free-to-play people off of big games like Dota, LoL, etc., when they don't have an investment in your game like that initial purchase price. There's a lot of interesting psychology there. And weirdly, our projections actually favored premium. Some quick numbers I'll run through. You can go to this URL if you want to, but the average revenue per user on PC at the time was between $1 and $4, and we thought we could probably sell at least 50,000 units at $20 based on how the first game had sold, promotion we expected from people like Sony. It seemed like a safe-ish bet. And we didn't think we could sell enough car hats to make that up necessarily. And this is an actual slide from the meeting where we decided to be premium. It's really rough. And you'll notice that the budget is about half of what we ended up spending. So way under budgeted. But in general, and this is really simple, rough math, but we estimated that we'd need almost 2 million free-to-play transactions just to break even versus only about 50,000 premium sales. And it seemed like kind of a no-brainer, like, are people going to buy 2 million car hats? I don't know. So moving on, another big one was what we deemed to be required features late in development. So for some context, we were trying to ship by last November or December, actually, 2014, not 15. And we came out about 6 months afterwards. And a big part of that was last-minute things that we realized we needed. So a big one, a very contentious one, was our party system. This seems mandatory now in multiplayer games, but at the time that was non-obvious to us. The first game didn't have one. And we didn't have any implementation. It was going to take a long time. But I don't know how to imagine Rocket League without being easy to party up with your friends in queue, right? Like, that's a big part of the appeal. And we had to seriously consider delaying the game for this specific feature. And we did. And it paid off really well. But at the time, that was a big expansion in budget and ship date. And secondly, on the same page, is matchmaking. So when we were trying to ship in November, we were a completely client-based matchmaking system, and I won't get too technical with this, but we switched to a superior server model where basically everyone goes into a matchmaking server and it decides who to pair up against each other. This is much better at creating matches, but we had to build an entire infrastructure, one that caught completely on fire when we shipped. But it had, both of these combined, I think, had a huge positive impact on the new player experience, playing with friends, and getting into good games. And these were things that we delayed the game basically 6 months and ballooned the budget just to do. So it was a really tough decision. I think it paid off, and we had the luxury of taking that time to do this. I don't know if everyone always will, but if you can, I wouldn't turn away from things like that. So another thing a lot of people don't know is our launch platforms. We were actually targeting PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 3. When we decided to go premium, the PS3 was still selling tremendous amounts of games, and we thought for best coverage we needed to do both. But shortly before release, we realized we just weren't going to hit optimization or feature complete on PS3 in time. And we thought Steam would come later, whenever that is. But at the last minute, we made the decision to prioritize it over PS3. And we played it every day on PC, so it's more a matter of what is the minimum stuff we need to do to ship on PC. And thank God we did, because it was the best decision we ever made. If you see any of our numbers, we were free for the first month on PlayStation Plus, and we got 5 million downloads. 6 million, Jeremy is signaling to me. And I don't know if we were going to cover server costs. Steam covered everything, and they pay very quickly, which is very important. I can't really imagine what we would have done if we had shipped only on PS4 and gotten that many users. So, some unintuitive insights. Custom physics. So this is a euphemism. Our car and ball interactions are actually completely fake. And by that I mean we don't use the built-in physics system in Unreal to model how cars and balls hit each other. Why would we do that? Real physics are way too random and unpredictable. That sounds really weird for a physics-based esport, if I can call it that. But in reality, you're looking for predictability and consistency in a game like this, especially at the speeds and velocities our players travel at. And real physics just does really weird stuff. And our general goal is to emulate player intent, not real impact. So if the player is angling himself and the ball towards the goal, it should probably go towards the goal, not at whatever random angle it bounces off of your vehicle at. But this isn't necessarily an intuitive thing, right? Like, you'd think when you're making a physics sport, you want the most accurate simulation possible. But the other benefit of this is it allows us to fine-tune for game balance. If you use real physics, You get real physics, it's messy. If you hit the ball really hard, it's going to go really hard. And we needed the ability to tune, for game balance reasons, if the car and ball are going super fast, maybe we don't want the full force applied to it. And so I'm going to show you a picture of our extremely advanced car hitbox simulation. It's a box collision. Again, this is somewhat weird, right? Like you'd think you'd want complete accuracy in a game as twitchy and competitive as Rocket League, but again, the predictability wins out here. It's important that when you touch the ball from a certain angle, it's going to bounce fairly consistently, and we found that box collision, as odd and inaccurate as that looks, and I hope you can see the little orange outlines, the predictability wins out over accurate simulation. And this is a really rough, I don't have a beautiful video for you, I'm sorry, but a really rough simulation of how our collision model is different from real physics. So on the left, you see a rough simulation of if I hit the ball with my fender, it's going to bounce off at what's called the impact normal at some speed based on me and how fast I'm traveling, the ball is traveling in what directions. And that doesn't seem that bad, right? Like it's somewhat predictable where it's going to go. But then when you look at how our physics works on the left, where we look at the vector between the ball's location and the car's location, it's almost always going in the direction that your camera's looking. So it's very predictable, right? Like it's consistently, if I want to hit the ball towards the goal, I'm going to align myself between the ball and the goal and hit it. And it makes the game a lot easier to pick up and play, and it also makes high-level play much more consistent. Now, when we started Rocket League, we didn't have this simple model. We actually were trying to iterate on the first game by making it much more realistic. And it does have some benefits, particularly if you imagine a soccer ball actually hitting the hood of your car. It will likely impact and roll up your windshield, and that's kind of a cool thing, right? You can almost dribble by catching the ball on your hood and driving around with it, whereas in our model it will actually bounce off, it'll reflect. So it's much more like ping pong or pool than true physics. And we thought that was kind of cool, so we wanted to make it work, but we released it to our alpha players, and they had roughly this reaction. They really hated it. Part of that is adjustment, right? Like they knew how the old game worked, and the new one was different, and different is terrible. But part of it was legitimate, right? They had lost a lot of the consistency and predictability they knew from the first game. And when we really looked at their feedback in our own internal playtest, it was just a bad trade-off. What we gained in subtlety and complexity of the physics model, we lost in predictability and consistency. So we went back to the single thing, but before we did, I wanted to share my favorite quote with you. This was from 2 months before the game shipped. This game is driven by greed and lazy design. It's as simple as that, and I sincerely hope it fails. There are far too many other better independent games out there by developers who actually care about and respect their customers for Rocket League to deserve any kind of success. This was from one of our veterans in April. And ironically, he went on to compete in and win Rocket League tournaments. So he's clearly not too principled about this. But this is what we were facing just before ship, right? Like now it's like, oh, Psyonix loves their community, you're great. But at the time, there was a lot of contention, even from our long-term fans, if we were doing the right thing. And just as I was throwing some GIFs in here to keep you guys awake, this is an example of our weird physics model, but what players are able to do with it. When we see people do stuff like this, we're utterly wowed. Like, none of us can execute that, right? Like, that's incredible. None of us has ever done anything half as cool as that. But these things show up on Reddit, and it's, we feel validated in having a very predictable and consistent physics system. So some unintended skills. This may sound obvious, but small changes can often have large effects. And in our case, a good case study is our dodge move. So if you've played Rocket League, or if you haven't, when you double jump, which is double tapping the A button and press a direction, you can do a directional dodge move. So you can front flip, you can side dodge, you can back flip. And the big change for Rocket League, just done sort of casually when we ported it over, was that these now use an impulse instead of a force. What does that mean? They're very bursty now. Whereas before, in the first game, which name I will not say again, you would very continuously move throughout the flip, right? A very steady speed. And now you have a very strong initial burst, and then that tapers over the duration of the dodge. And this has some particularly useful effects. So this is an instance of me doing it poorly. So what you're seeing there is I mistimed my dodge. I flew correctly to the ball, but I dodged too early. and so most of that initial burst momentum was lost. This is doing it better. So leaving aside small differences in trajectory, you can see that I got a lot of that initial dodge momentum. It hit the ball much harder, and I got a powerful shot on goal. We initially thought this might be a mistake to be fixed. It was like doing unintentional stuff that we didn't really think about. But in practice, it's a great skill mechanic. Veteran players can get more powerful shots, but it requires careful timing and execution. That sounds great, right? And the really big bonus is that newbies don't know how to do this. We had a goal from the start of Rocket League to make a more accessible newbie experience. And in effect, this means our games are slower paced and more manageable, but we still have that high-end speed that the veterans wanted. And it also increases our tactical depth without really trying to. You have to sacrifice your double jump move to do this. So you really have to think about when you leave the ground, do you want the initial height, or do you want to save that extra power for the contact point? 0-second magic. This is one of our favorite features, and it was kind of just thrown into the first game. It's become a huge part of Rocket League, but the basic rule is when the clock hits 0, the game isn't over until the ball touches the ground. That sounds like a really small thing, but in practice, it has some really cool effects. So this is a GIF from Reddit. You can see the game is tied, the clock just hit 0, and this guy's going to try to score. Pretty incredible, right? Unless you're the guy playing goal, in which case that feels terrible. And I hope this isn't too loud, but this also has some really incredible benefits for competitive play. So this is our first major esports tournament, the last game of the finals.
Second. Little sloppy defense, though, coming from Urban. Not unraveling completely, though. 3-3, we're going to overtime.
4, I don't know about that. That ball is up 3. 5 under trying to make a play. Kronovi just needs to let it touch the floor, but Gambit's going to be there as well. Tries to keep it in play. In goes Kyle! Kyle! No! Kyle! What? Oh my goodness gracious me! What a finish!
Wow!
So we watched that live and lost our collective shit in the office. And you know, we've been playing this rule forever, and it's still incredibly exciting. And I just want to emphasize that it was a small thing, right? Like this wasn't a big design document. This was one person's idea that we threw in the game and left, and it turned out to be huge. So finding little iterative tweaks like this to add flavor to your game, I think, can go an incredibly long way. Demolish is a hot topic with our community. So I don't have a great video for this, but the basic rule is if you're driving fast enough and you hit another car, that car will explode. That sounds pretty griefable, right? Like it wasn't really balanced or designed in the first game. It was actually a holdover from when the game was a combat game before it was turned into soccer. And it's kind of weird, right? There's no penalty for blowing somebody up. And it encourages violent and aggressive behavior, neither of which sounds particularly great for a family-friendly competitive game. But we left it in anyway. And it turns out that it's used strategically by top teams. If you're turtling in the goal, you always have to worry about the threat of some guy coming and utterly destroying your car. And it gives less skilled players an outlet. We have all sorts of people that say, I can't score, but I love blowing people up. Great. And my takeaway from this, I don't know that it's actually unbalanced. There are trade-offs using boost and whatnot, but maybe unbalanced mechanics can be okay. Maybe we shouldn't knee-jerk remove anything that we're not totally confident in, see how it plays out with the player base. So quick chat. Hopefully you've heard of this. This was a last-minute system. We came up with it about a month or two before release. This is a community image, but the basic gist is that you can quickly type prefixed messages to your teammates using the D-pad or the stick on your controller. We actually cut this for release and then added it maybe like 2 weeks before we submitted to certification. And it's been huge for us. You can see on the right, this is a Reddit thread. This pops up everywhere. It's turned into a meme. And it was just a one-off feature we threw in because we were worried about people chatting during the match. Like, can you imagine on PlayStation, your goalie is like cursing you out using the PlayStation keyboard in the middle of the game? So we were hoping that this would be a nice outlet for quick messaging. And it's been great. And I kind of believe that it has had a net positive effect on our community. It's so easy to compliment people, to say things like nice shot after the other team scores, that I think it's contributed to our community being a little bit more friendly overall than our average online community. Okay, so moving on to trying to pretend to know why we succeeded. Number one, more than anything, is market conditions with how video is consumed. In 2008, Twitch did not exist. YouTube was nothing like it is today. So I have an image here. We were briefly ahead of League of Legends on Twitch. Always be proud of that one. And on the right, you can see just some of the YouTuber content. I love their terrible tooltip images, but there's all these people now that are content creators, and they need our games to fuel their brand, right? So that didn't exist a long time ago. Now, these guys are hungry for new games to make their own content off of, and it's basically free marketing, right? Like, we didn't spend very much, if anything, on actual traditional marketing for Rocket League. It was all driven zero. Jeremy is telling me $0 on traditional marketing. It was entirely Twitch, YouTube, cross-promotion, etc. Second one is Reddit. Reddit was absolutely massive for us. We're very active on it, but in particular, the PS4 subreddit picked our game up during the beta, and that's what blew us really wide, we think. The GIFs took over. All of PS4 Reddit was Rocket League GIFs, much to some people's chagrin. But that's what really seeded the game out. We started getting streamers asking for beta keys based on seeing the game on Reddit. So we think that's where it all basically started. And I can't overstate how important it is to be active and engaged on Reddit in your Reddit community. Esports, obviously, since the last game, the rise of esports is huge. And a sort of important thing is that our veteran player base gave us a built-in pro scene. So one concern we had with the first game was, if you didn't know how to play car soccer, you wouldn't really know what was possible. We got some reviews that were like, this is sort of random and unpredictable, it's not a good game. But we had the benefit of players like Kronovi and other guys that have gone on to become fairly well-known pros playing on Twitch from day one and before. So new players could go to that and see, oh, wow, aspirationally, that's amazing. I want to get that good. And it set this really high bar for what was possible in the game and what was possible as an esport. And the audience is now trained to watch this stuff. Like that MLG video that we watched might not have made a lot of sense in 2008, but now it's just normal, right? Like esports are a thing. And this is a little bit shoved in here, but there's a much different interest in smaller titles. In 2008, we barely got any coverage as an indie PSN game. These days, indie games get front page on Reddit, and they get featuring by major websites. It's just a different market for smaller games, if you can break through, than it was in 2008. So I'm calling this inherent virality. It's just kind of a silly term, but there's a lot of things about Rocket League, unintentional and intentional, that make it really good at spreading on social media. It's extremely gifable. Physics are easy to grasp and be wowed by, unlike a MOBA where if you don't know how the game works, you can't really parse a cool play. In Rocket League, even if you've never played before, one of those GIFs that we've watched would probably impress you, right? Like, it's inherently understandable. And like I said, it took over the PlayStation subreddit on its own. There was no sponsored stuff. We weren't seeding GIFs on like alternate accounts without our names on them. It was entirely community driven. And it's easy to learn, difficult to master. I know we all aim for this, and I wouldn't say we came into Rocket League thinking it would be this. Honestly, we were very worried about it being a heavily skill-dependent game. But what it turned out was people really enjoyed sucking together. It was funny watching everyone fail with you. And that wasn't intentional. We lucked into that, and what made it work was that our matchmaking was able to pair those people up. And again, difficult plays are aspirational and impressive. This is another one of my favorite GIFs, showing off a little bit of team play. So we referenced that a lot early because, especially with the first game, people just didn't believe stuff was really possible, right? Like, this is just a random game where you bounce the ball around. But you can see, as players attain mastery, they can do incredible things and incredible team plays. So moving on, Twitch was a massive part of our breakout success. And we think the game is inherently Twitch-friendly. It wasn't designed to be. It just happens to be a sport, and that kind of works. But it meant that broadcaster battles happen naturally. We had friends that were popular streamers. They challenged other streamers. That got bigger and bigger. It was just fun to watch these guys duel on live Twitch streams. And we did specifically a pre-release early access for streamers. I know everybody's doing this now. It's often paid. But in our case, we just said, if you guys want to play, we'll let you in early as long as you stream it. And they played the hell out of it. That was a massive part of our initial PR. And a really quick note, we didn't do any paid promos. Like I said, we didn't spend on this. But I think it's an important note because we treat these guys like humans, not marketing vehicles. I really hate the word influencers. because it treats these Twitch streamers like purchasable robots that don't have their own opinions or interest in your game. And it goes a long way just actually saying like, hey, I'll give you a key if you want to play, no pressure, and talking to them in their Twitch streams and showing up and answering questions. And finally, going back to the 0-second stuff, our intense matches and overtimes drove a lot of subscriber excitement. The Twitch chat was pretty hilarious in any kind of overtime. We played a couple dev matches against streamers where the whole Twitch turned against us. And I think one of the major streamers, like there's a video of him just saying, fuck the devs when we let them score on us in overtime. So it was a lot of fun. PS Plus, I just put this on here because it's such a big topic, and I think it's a big question mark on whether this is the right decision for a particular game. It was, we think, for us. Ultimately, this was the big spread. We had all this publicity on Reddit and Twitch, but PS Plus broke down those barriers of, oh, I heard about this weird car soccer game that my friends are playing. I might as well download it because it's free. I can't overstate how important we think that was. And the nice thing about Plus is it allows us to stay a premium game and have the reach of a free-to-play game. And the fact that we were on Steam let us profit from that while giving the game away for free. It's a really, I don't know how replicable that is, but it worked out tremendously for us. We agonized over PS Plus early on, but it ended up being a great decision. Timing, so I'm kind of getting into the stuff now where we don't want to take too much credit for how the game did because there's a lot of external factors, right? Like people don't always go into what, aside from our own work, made us succeed. In summer 2015, and to be fair, this was chosen specifically by our marketing team, there was very little competition. The PS catalog was still fairly thin, and every release was big news, right? Like we didn't have to go sell ourselves to websites and blogs and publications. They needed something to write about. And the visibility on PS4 fueled our Steam success. But we got so much free press. I think there was a period where Kotaku wrote about Rocket League for like 90 days in a row. And at some point it got kind of comical, right? Like, we get it, Rocket League is great, but do you have anything else to write about? But it benefited us in a tremendous way. And it's all down to timing. I think as an indie developer, it's easy to look at yourself in a different bucket than a big game, right? Like, it doesn't matter if we release in the same month in, like, say, November with Call of Duty and Destiny or something, because we have different audiences, right? But that's not really true. There's only so much media out there. There's only so much social media attention that can go to any one game at a time, and scheduling carefully can be the entire difference between success and failure. Luck. This is a pet peeve of mine. I cannot stand when people come up here and have a successful game and just say, just make a really good game and you'll succeed. That's not true. We got really lucky. And you have to be aware of biases when analyzing success. I won't go too into the psychology of this, but if you look up anything from survivorship bias to other things like that, we tend to fixate on these successes and think they're replicable, when it turns out that there were probably 10 Rocket Leagues that failed. And a lot of ours is down to timing and luck. One game succeeding doesn't make this process necessarily repeatable, even by us. And random luck can look a lot like genius in retrospect. But I will say we maximized our odds, and I think that's the best we can do as developers, is to carefully schedule, and if you can, in today's era of streaming and social media, build in whatever features you can to make that happen naturally. So, post-release lessons. Our number one challenge was scaling. We estimated about 10,000 concurrent users. We got 180,000, which is roughly 35x what we said our beta peak was. And this is pretty much what our server room looked like. I don't know how you plan for this. Our beta was nowhere near this, and it just utterly blew up. And there was no way for us to really load test at this scale. So it's somewhat of an unsolved problem for us. We did an open beta, and it was nothing to do with what the actual launch was like. So I don't have a great solution for you, but be prepared, and be prepared to work long nights. Patching on multiple platforms. If you've done it, you know this is kind of horrible. Different cert times and deployment times make maintaining a cross-play game really difficult. Obviously, we hope that this becomes more of a standard practice, especially with us moving to Xbox cross-play hopefully soon. But it's going to drive your producers crazy, and it's going to delay things. We do hold back PS4 patches until Sony approves PlayStation ones. And there's a really long lead time on DLC. This bit us a little bit when we did the PS Plus deal, because the idea was always to be free and have DLC for people to buy that had gotten the game for free. But because of the long lead time of, okay, you submit the patch with the DLC, and then it'll take us 10 business days to put it on the store. We didn't really know about all that stuff when we shipped, so that really bit us in terms of getting content to our players quickly. And I would, in general, add at least a month DLC dev cycles if you're going to be on console. A big one for us that wasn't expected is the trickiness of balancing brand and cross-promo. So if you played Rocket League, you know we're kind of sellouts in terms of we'll put anything in our game if it gets us a cross-promotion. And that extends to things like we put in the DeLorean and the Batmobile most recently. And it's a tough balance, right? Like Rocket League I wouldn't say is a strong narrative IP or anything, but you can start to lose like what is Rocket League versus is it just a vehicle for selling branded content. So we just tried to strike a balance. I don't have really a rule of thumb, but it is something that we're keeping an eye on. A big challenge for us was adapting to our community size. So like I said, we started at 10K concurrent maybe, and it was really easy for us to be very present on Reddit and forums and Twitter answering every question. We got a lot of love and devoted fans for doing that, but as the player base grew, that becomes impossible, right? Like you can't answer 180,000 people's questions. And it can make you look bad. Suddenly the developers aren't there anymore. You're not responsive anymore. And it's a really tough challenge to scale that responsiveness to a larger player base. The best we do is just try to drop in as much as we can, but it's just a shift that's going to happen if you're successful. An unexpected one for us was that selling DLC to free players was really hard. I think we naively thought that we gave them the game for free so they'd be happy to buy our DLC. That's not true. Our Steam attach rate is actually dramatically higher than PlayStation. On Steam, I think our first DLC is something like a 25% attach rate, which is really high for DLC. And we think that has a lot to do with sunk cost, right? Like you've bought the game on Steam, you're more willing to pay more for DLC, whereas on PS4, I got the game for free. I don't really feel like spending $2 on it. So what would we do differently? Everything we didn't have time to do properly. I know that's kind of a stupid answer, but the number one thing would be find some way to test our database at a higher scale than our beta, even though we only estimated 10K. We just weren't ready, and our partners specifically weren't ready for it. We would plan better for post-release content. We did a couple DLC packs that probably weren't thought out as well as they should have been. So even though we weren't sure how successful we would be, we just didn't do enough thought thinking around what is our DLC going to look like? Will this appeal to the player base that we have? And I would really encourage, if you're doing anything multiplayer, to have day one spectator and competitive support. We patched this in later, but it's a really interesting challenge to ship a competitive game out and not have a standardized way that it should be viewed and broadcasted. So we had fairly rudimentary spectating tools, and we saw some really rough Twitch streams where the casters are doing the best they can with the tools they have, but it makes the game look bad, right? Like you want the smoothest, best experience possible for people that haven't played your game to watch it and get invested in it. So if you can drop a great spectator camera in day one, that will only help you. We still agonize over this sometimes, whether to go PS Plus or not. I don't think we can say it would have been a good idea not to. It's so hard to extract our success from that viral spread through the free game. But you look at the sales and it's like, that's a lot of money that we gave away. Honestly, I don't have a good answer for you. I say we still agonize over it a little bit, but I think we'd definitely do it again, given the choice. The thing was, we would definitely try to have DLC again week one. We feel like we missed a window in terms of this massive PS4 player base that first month, and they had nothing to buy. They were screaming at us like, give us DLC to purchase. We want to support you, and we had nothing. And by the time we got something out, that player base had dropped off pretty dramatically. So we're going to open, about 10 minutes left. We're going to open up the floor for questions. If I covered anything too quickly, feel free to email me or tweet at me. I'll send you the deck or whatever else you want. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to wrap around out in the hall here for questions afterwards if we don't get to you now. Thanks.
Hello.
Hey.
I have a question. You were super successful with the soccer field gameplay, and you later introduced hockey and basketball. Was there a reason why you chose to introduce those game modes, considering you were super successful with soccer?
We didn't consciously choose to do that. It was more, we were experimenting and it was fun. So to give you the backstory on hockey, Ben down here put a puck in the game and we were like, this is kind of fun, let's release it. So it was literally a 1 to 2 day work that we just shipped out as a seasonal mode. And the players surprisingly took to it pretty strongly. So I wouldn't say we had a strong design to say we need more sport modes. It was just whatever came naturally out of our experimentation after launch.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, I work on Spy Party, and
Cool.
I'm going to do Steam Early Access this year, and I have no idea what to load test to. And but the thing about, like, oh, sure, you know, maybe I'll get 180,000. But the point is, like, it's a finite resource, my time.
Yep.
So, yes, you should, of course, load test to infinite so that you scale wide. And
Yep.
how do you, like...
I don't honestly, so the question is, how do you know what to try to load test scale to? Some of our programmers might have good answers for you that I don't. I just know that I don't think we went quite as high as we should have, right? Like our beta concurrency was 5,000, and so we expected 10,000. We probably should have anticipated 50, right? Not, you never expect 180, but
Right.
we should have gone 5x instead of 2x or whatever it was.
And I guess, do you feel like it's a good problem to have at that point? And even
Yeah.
though you were spending late nights, like,
Sure.
I mean, was there backlash? It's like nobody ever gets pressed for not melting down on launch day. So.
I do think it's inevitable, right? Like every MMO these days has a terrible launch and
Right.
people forget about it as long as you're supportive. So I think what helped us in particular was that we were very communicative, right? Like we're making jokes on Twitter, like our engineers are in there fixing the servers right now. And it took a really long time. It took us about 3 weeks to get really stable. And at the time we were very nervous that we'd never recover from that, right? Like we botched our window.
Yeah.
And what we found over time is that people didn't really care. Like as long as we kept the game going and with our post-release support, it's been glossed over. But I don't know what I would plan going into another one like this.
Right.
It's just a really tough problem. It's like you said, with time and resources that most indies have, it's impossible to accurately test. So
Cool, thanks.
yeah.
Earlier, you mentioned how one of the problems you had was there were too many cooks in the kitchen. And you guys kind of So can you talk a little bit about how you guys changed the decision-making process in the team?
Sure.
And how do you make sure the people maybe who were involved before and no longer is, like how did you manage still to get the engagement?
Sure. So the question is how we managed the too many cooks problem and kept people engaged that were unfortunately divorced from that decision-making process. I can't say it's a totally solved problem for us. The specific solution for Rocket League is we adopted a roughly 5-man leadership team instead of the much larger studio. 5 people that worked on the first game that felt passionately about it, and they decided sort of as a group via discussion how to go forward. That worked really well for us for Rocket League. It isn't how we've done every other game, but it worked for Rocket League. In terms of keeping people invested, that's still a problem we're trying to solve, right? It's a very hard communication problem to take everyone's feedback and make them feel like they're being heard, especially as your studio scales. And the only thing we've really succeeded at doing, I think, is running playtests where everyone gets to give feedback, and then that just goes through a filter of production or design, and then that leadership team decides what to do with it. So everyone feels like they're at least getting an outlet of saying what they want to see. Whether that goes into the game is a different story, but I think that's sort of an unavoidable problem with a larger team.
Hi. When you were considering doing open world, were you ever going in the direction of like Smuggler's Run, changing focus away from sports entirely?
We definitely considered more like racing or objective focused gameplay. The soccer was kind of an afterthought at the point, and we just never hit on fun, repeatable open world gameplay. We didn't have a lot of confidence that we could build enough content to make a whole game out of that. Yeah, thanks.
Could you talk a little bit about the design decisions behind changing the ranking system and what led to that?
Yeah, so I ended up cutting that from the talk because it was going to go too long. So the question is, how did we evolve our ranking system from launch? So really quickly, we launched with a very simple system that just showed you your skill rating that we calculate and classified you into like a gold, silver, bronze level based on that. We moved to a League of Legends type system for Season 1 that gives you more of a sense of progression. So again, if you watch Josh Minke's talk, he goes into a lot of the trade-offs of progression versus skill rating. It's a whole in-depth thing, but the general gist was you start lower and you progress up the ladder to a higher tier. And it means that your skill is somewhat divorced from your ranking. So you might be in silver, but our skill system thinks you're a gold player and it takes you a while to climb there. That has some benefits in games like Hearthstone that are very much like 1v1 progression based, but what we found, we recently moved away from that and back to a pure skill based system, is that our player base, for whatever reason, whether it's the sports focus, the lack of RPG mechanics, etc., really hated the distinction between ranking and skill. They found it very confusing and frustrating. So we chose to move back to a system that's much more transparent. If you're in gold, or what we call gold now, I think challenger, you will play against other players in that tier. There's no discrepancy between the visual rank you see and the players that you get matched against. Hope that answers your question.
Hey man, I think Rocket League it has like amazing new player experience. So my question is, you had this community that was largely composed of veteran players. Did you do anything specific to polish the new player experience when you had a lot of voices coming to you that were veterans?
Not in particular. I mean, we focus tested with people that we knew in San Diego that had no idea what they were doing. That helped us a little bit. But I think we could probably do a lot more with the new player experience. We kind of just throw you in and hope that matchmaking will take care of it. The main thing we did was build much more extensive training modes than we had in the first game. So if you go into the training section, you can practice being a goalie or a striker or doing aerials. And that was our main concession to saying, like, if you're not comfortable going online, here's a safe space to practice your basic skills in.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
So as a developer, I was very curious to know what your questions are for the longevity of Rocket League, and how are you going to try to answer these questions?
Okay. So the question is how we think the longevity is going to work with Rocket League. I don't think we totally know. There was some doubt later last year whether it was a fad or not. Like, we saw this huge player base spike in the first couple months and the typical downturn afterwards. But we've actually seen with Steam sales and other holiday stuff, it's actually going up again, looking a little bit more like what you'd see with something like Counter-Strike. We're hoping to keep that trend going. All we know to do right now is to keep supporting the game. We keep doing free content drops, and we have the luxury of doing that because the game is sold pretty well. Not everybody does. And that's our only goal right now, is just to keep providing support and hopefully push the esports angle as well to drive interest from different types of users.
Great talk. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
When most people think of esports, they think of like the very strategic, very steep learning curve, for hardcore players. And I know you guys tried your like grittier reboot. When you're designing an esport, how do you strike a balance between like super strategic, difficult to learn, and versus like more casual, if you want to reach both the hardcore players and also the more casual players?
So the question is, designing an esport, how you reach casual and competitive players, basically. I don't have a great answer for you because we didn't design Rocket League as an esport. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, is they say, we're going to make the next esport, not we're going to make a really fun game. We knew that it had potential to be a good esport in terms of how competitive and physics-based it was. But as a general rule of thumb, I think you have to hit both audiences if you can, right? Like, people look at MOBAs as this complex, great thing to shoot for, but in some ways MOBAs have a pretty good early player experience too, right? Like, it's fun to level up a hero and acquire items in a way that's totally different than the meta that you see in competitive play. So I don't think you can really ignore one or both player bases, because then you'll never develop the community you need to drive an esport.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What are your thoughts on how the game is when it's launched for a new player, and then expanding on that with, like, you added the hockey mode, for example, or maybe overloading players' choices if they buy the game at a later date? Do you have thoughts on that?
We definitely do. It actually, so the question is, are we worried about overloading players, new players later into the game cycle? We're definitely concerned about it on two fronts. One is just purely matchmaking. The biggest rule of thumb with matchmaking is don't make too many buckets, right? So every mode that we add is another bucket that players are in that makes it harder to find a good game. We don't have a great solution for that. We've kind of been trying to rotate, like you see a lot of games where something comes out for a month and then goes away. And that also mitigates your question about complexity in terms of you're not presented with all of our nude modes at once, just whichever one is currently available. Beyond that, I think the thing we have on our side is it's not a game like TF2. So like Team Fortress is a good example of a game that's tough to come back to later, right? Because now, the last time I played it, every class did kind of what I knew it did, and now demo men are wielding axes, and people are throwing jars of piss at me. Like, it's a very intimidating game to come back to later, and I think the advantage we have is whatever the mode is, it's still at its core a very simple interaction. Even in hockey, it's cars that perform the same as they do in every other mode hitting a puck. There's no new power-ups or anything crazy like that. So we think that focus on accessibility staves off that a little bit.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Okay, we're going to cut this off. You can talk to me in the wrap-up room, or any of our guys will hang around. Thanks for coming.